Who is the Crimson Hound?
Oh, hello. I was reading Whitechester. So, the Crimson Hound. What is the Crimson Hound and where does it come from? Okay, so basically, a few years ago, I just had this idea of doing an actual play show, an actual play channel, um, where I basically, actual plays normally are kind of like either an ongoing story run by one person with their group or just different one shots, stuff like that. And my idea was a bit different. It was basically, what if I have this one character, always played by me, but every different story for that character is run by a different game master. And I was leaning a lot into the idea that in the OSR, the old school Renaissance, all based on D20 games, like you can have like similar rule sets, but everyone interprets them differently. Everyone has their own house rules. And I like the idea of this character, um, that would kind of have very different stories depending on who was running the game. So that was something that I liked, like kind of like Batman, for example. Like Batman, one story might be this like serial killer thriller investigation, and then the next story, Batman is like fighting on giant typewriters, and the next story he's dealing with aliens, and the next story it's back down to earth for some like personal drama about someone he tried to save in the fire and didn't manage to do it. And so it's like a single character that can have very different types of stories depending on the writers. So I kind of saw like the guest game masters that would come to run a game for a Crimson Hound, as each having their own house rules, each having their own style, types of stories to tell, and all that. And because I was already doing something weird, I thought I would just go for it. And I went with BX, which, I think the most popular version of BX right now is Old School Essentials. But I went with BX as like kind of like the default language for the game at first. And then I default, and then for Serial 5, the current serial, I went with Amazing Adventures, which is from a company, Troll Lore Games. Amazing Adventures is basically like their flagship game, Castles and Crusades, again a D20 game, but made for pulp adventures, pulp style adventures. And this is relevant because what happens is that, in a way, it made my job more difficult than finding guest game masters because um, wanting to differentiate the show and the style and everything, I didn't make it medieval fantasy. I made it a cyberpunk supernatural horror, and I made it basically like I mentioned pulp, right? So made like a pulp serial, but set in a cyberpunk world where horror and the supernatural exist. And the main character was a pulp vigilante, an anti-hero, um, called the Crimson Hound. And yeah, the Crimson Hound is a half vampire, um, who used to be. I mean, the background I gave, I went with the idea that people debate what's a level 1 character in an OSR game. Is it like a farmer who just left the farm, or is it a veteran soldier? So for me, I went with, okay, so I like to think that a level 1 character, even though they're not like invincible, they're certainly very like squishy. They're still like a competent, if they're like a warrior type or whatever, they're still a competent soldier. So the story for Crimson Hound is basically he was part of this like unit that would hunt monsters, and he doesn't know if it was the government or some private entity, some corporation, he doesn't know. And he was being drugged all the time, so his memories are like hazy. He doesn't remember very clearly what happened, except at some point he was betrayed and left for dead. And then once he was off the drugs, his mind started being more clear, but he didn't know like where he came from. He doesn't know who he is basically. All he knows is that he craves blood, and he basically, not knowing what to do with his life, he reverted to doing what he sort of remembered, which is hunting monsters and protecting humans. Not necessarily because that's what his, and this is where it's very much an anti-hero story. It's not necessarily. I mean, he does have a moral code and empathy, but he started doing it mostly just because he didn't know what else to do. He kind of defaulted to what he knows to do, you know. And along the way, I've been playing him as this like he's not a human; he's a monster, but um, he does have a capacity for empathy, and he is developing it as the series continues, very sporadically because it's hard to find guest GMs. I have a very busy life, so um, you know, I have trouble finding time to continue the show. So in between serials and even episodes in the same serial, there can be a lot of time that passes by. But yeah, so basically, my idea is that he starts as this like completely monstrous being who might become a true hero, like pretending to be a hero who might become a real hero or might become a complete monster along the way. We'll see what happens. And his persona is like very much like based on kind of like pulp comic book characters, both in the real world as I think of this character, and in the universe as this character give himself the persona of the Crimson Hound. Um, and I have fun playing with that, playing with the fact that he has empathy for people. He does care about the downtrodden, those who are helpless, but at the same time, once he sees someone as an enemy, he's very much like a pulp anti-hero vigilante. Um, you know, um, where he's gonna do things that are definitely not very heroic, not very forgiving, or even not very human. You know, like if he fights someone to the death, he might drink their blood. You know, like he might eat them, no problem. He sees it as a normal thing to do to an enemy. Um, and I kind of like playing with the idea that this is a guy who kind of like he's still a level one character, even at Serial Five, because in old school games, characters don't level up quickly. But it's kind of funny how he's very he can fail at things. You know, if the die roll determines he failed, he can definitely fail. And this is not like this unstoppable being. You know, he's more than human, but he's still like he can still be killed by normal people. It's not like this incredibly like it's not an unstoppable kill machine. Um, he just has a few like supernatural abilities, but he's a level one character, and it's just funny to play with that, with the fact that he's this like he's the tough guy, but still level one, and he'll make mistakes and he'll mess up, and for me it's like in character I play him very serious, but me the player I realize how flawed he is and how messed up he is, and also how he often fails at stuff. But what I like about him is he keeps trying. He keeps trying to be a better person. He keeps trying, with his limited understanding of what it is to be a person, both because of his background and his nature. And yeah, for example, like just to give an example of how his like worldview and moral and morality is kind of like skewed from what we might consider normal. In Serial 3, at some point he deals with a woman who's possessed by an evil entity, and it's in a dangerous building with lots of like criminals and stuff like that, like criminal dealings. And what happens at some point is that he defeats the possessed woman, but then he worries about what happens if he leaves her there, because she's still possessed. He just like knocked her unconscious. I think that's anyway. He incapacitated her in some way, and then he was kind of worried if he leaves and she then leaves the room and attacks the criminals, they might shoot her down, and that they might kill the woman who's being possessed. So his solution to the problem, because he didn't have anything to tie her up or something, was to for the Crimson. What he found as a solution was to break the character's legs and arms so she wouldn't go anywhere while being possessed. So that's pretty horrifying. Obviously, that's a pretty horrifying solution. But to a character who's kind of like morally and emotionally limited, as a Crimson Hound is, that seemed like a very pragmatic way of handling it and a very humane way from his point of view. Um, I haven't determined how much he could be able of becoming very much like a normal person, or if by his nature, you know, or if by his nature he might be a bit more limited in how humane he can become. That's a layer that I would like to discover through role playing, but it's not like the story is advancing very quickly. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, he's a character that's still being fleshed out very slowly over sporadic games over the years. But if you want to check out the story, in which actually James Grim Jim has been one of the guest GMs, and even a player, by the way. If you want to see Grim Jim as a player, I run a game for him in that channel, the Chronicles of Crimson Hound channel. It was a one shot called Shadows of Blumengrad, and the Gargoyle Pass was the title of that one shot. Shadows of Blumengrad is kind of like whenever I want to run a game for people set in that world, but not me playing the Crimson Hound, me running a game for that people set in that world in the city of Blumengrad, which is where the Crimson Hound operates. That's kind of like the name I give it, Shadows of Blumengrad, and then whatever the story is. So that would be the Gargoyle Pass, and Grim Jim was a player. So if you want to see Grim Jim as a player for a change, and you want to see what I am like as a GM, that would be a one shot. That might be interesting to people who are following James, who doesn't always just GM. Even though I think it's his preference, yeah. But I think it's good for every GM to also be a player from time to time, right? Yeah. But I'm not gonna get too much into that because I think there's later questions that will address other aspects of how I choose to do things with the actual play. And hey, you know what? If you have any questions about the actual play, you can follow me on social media. I'm sure James will put all the links in there. Chronicles of Crimson Hound at gmail.com as well. Have an email. So yeah, go check it out if you like to see an actual play. That didn't sound very exciting, did it? But yeah, if you want to check out the Adventures of Crimson Hound, go check it out. Thank you for watching.